The billionaire's fiancé was born deaf, until the new maid pulled out something shocking. The champagne glass shattered before anyone could stop it. Crystal exploded across white marble, sharp and sudden, the sound cutting through 200 conversations at once. Heads turned. Cameras swiveled. A woman in a gown worth more than most cars stood frozen at the center of the Hale Foundation gala, her hand still suspended in midair where the glass had slipped. Seraphina Locke didn't flinch at the noise. She stood perfectly still, her expression unchanged, her dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the crowd. Around her, guests whispered behind jeweled fingers, their voices dripping with practiced sympathy. Poor thing can't even hear it broke. Such a shame. So beautiful, but Arden's a saint for loving her anyway. Staff rushed forward with towels and brooms. Arden Hale appeared at Seraphina's side within seconds, his hand finding her elbow with the precision of a man who'd performed this dance 1,000 times. He guided her back from the mess, his jaw tight, his smile never wavering for the cameras. His fingers pressed into her skin just hard enough to leave marks no one would see under silk. He signed something to her with his free hand. Sure. Quick. The movements looked gentle to anyone watching, but Seraphina's shoulders curved inward like she'd been struck. She nodded, smiled, let herself be led away from the broken glass and the staring eyes. No one noticed how her breathing had changed 3 seconds before the glass fell. No one saw the way her pupils had dilated when the waiter's tray tilted. No one questioned why a woman who couldn't hear would turn her head toward the kitchen doors a full beat before they swung open. But across the ballroom, standing against the wall in a black uniform that made her invisible, a woman named Maribel Cruz noticed everything. Before we dive deeper, we will like to know where you are watching from. Is it New York, California, or London? Do let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification. She'd been working at the Hale estate for exactly 9 days. Long enough to learn the rules. Not long enough to understand why breaking them felt like survival. The mansion overlooked the Pacific, all glass and stone and money that didn't need to announce itself. Inside, silence moved through the rooms like something alive. Not the comfortable quiet of peace, but the manufactured kind that came from fear. Staff spoke in whispers. Doors closed without sound. Even laughter felt borrowed, like it needed permission to exist. Maribel had worked in houses like this before, not this wealthy but close enough to recognize the weight of control when it pressed down on everything. She cared for dying women who clutched her hand and begged her not to tell their husbands they were scared. She knew what power looked like when it wore expensive suits and smiled for photographers. But this house felt different. This house felt wrong. Arden Hale was 34, handsome in the way men with inherited wealth often were, sharp jaw, perfect teeth, custom everything. His family owned half the commercial real estate in Los Angeles and most of the politicians who mattered. The Hale Foundation threw galas like this 4 times a year, each one raising millions for causes that looked good in headlines. And at the center of it all stood Seraphina. 28. Elegant. Trap. At least, that's what Maribel's gut kept screaming every time she watched them together. Seraphina had been introduced to her on the second day. Arden had stood between them, translating through sign language, his voice smooth and practiced. This is Maribel. She'll be assisting you directly. She's been briefed on your needs. Seraphina's eyes had met Maribel's for just a moment. Dark. Searching. Then she'd nodded and looked away. Arden had leaned closer to Maribel then, his voice dropping low enough that no one else could hear. Do not speak to my fiancée unless spoken to. And remember, she cannot hear you. The way he'd said cannot had felt rehearsed. Like he'd delivered that line before and expected it to work every time. Maribel had nodded. Lowered her eyes. Played the part. But she'd worked with the deaf before. With the elderly who'd lost their hearing to age or illness. She knew what it looked like when someone lived in silence. This wasn't it. Seraphina moved through the world like someone listening to a song no one else could hear. Her timing was too perfect. Her reactions too fast. She turned toward footsteps before they got close. She tensed when voices rose, even when no one was signing to her yet. And sometimes, late at night when Maribel brought her tea or adjusted the pillows on her bed, Seraphina would stare at her with an expression that made Maribel's chest ache. It was the look of someone drowning in shallow water. Tonight, after the gala, after the guests had filtered out and the staff had cleared the last of the champagne flutes, Maribel was sent upstairs to help Seraphina out of her gown. The bedroom was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, furniture that cost more than Maribel's childhood home. Seraphina stood in front of the mirror, her back to Maribel, waiting. Maribel moved carefully, her fingers finding the hidden zipper along the spine of the dress. The fabric was heavy, expensive, designed to look effortless. She eased it down slowly the way she'd been trained. That's when she saw it. A scar. Small. Precise. Just behind Seraphina's left ear, hidden beneath her hair. Not accidental. Deliberate. Maribel's hands froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd seen scars like that before, on patients who'd had medical devices implanted or removed. Cochlear implants. Hearing aids. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. Seraphina turned slightly, catching Maribel's reflection in the mirror. Their eyes met. For 3 seconds neither of them moved. Then Seraphina reached up and brushed her hair forward, covering the scar again. She stepped out of the gown without a word, her face unreadable. Maribel folded the dress with shaking hands, her mind racing. Later, alone in the small staff quarters tucked into the east wing, Maribel sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. She thought about the scar. About the way Seraphina's eyes always seemed to hear things her ears supposedly couldn't. About the way Arden watched his fiancée like a man guarding something stolen. She thought about the rules she'd been given on her first day. Do not ask questions. Do not make assumptions. Do not interfere. But some silences weren't peaceful. Some silences were cages. And Maribel Cruz had spent her entire life learning how to recognize the difference. If you are still watching, comment, "I'm still here." And share this story with someone you know needs to hear it. The slap came without sound. Maribel was in the hallway when it happened, carrying fresh linens toward the master suite. She'd paused near the doorway when she heard Arden's voice, low, controlled, the kind of quiet that felt louder than shouting. She shouldn't have stopped. Shouldn't have looked. But she did. Through the gap in the door, she saw Arden grip Seraphina's wrist and twist it just enough to make her gasp. His other hand came up fast, open-palmed, connecting with her cheek in a motion so practiced it barely disturbed his hair. Seraphina's head snapped to the side. She didn't cry out. Didn't make a sound. She just stood there, breathing hard, her free hand pressed against her face. Arden released her wrist and stepped back, smoothing his shirt. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. Almost gentle. "You embarrassed me tonight." He signed as he talked, his hands moving with sharp precision. "The glass. The hesitation during my speech. People notice these things, Seraphina. They're watching us." Seraphina nodded. Her hands trembled as she signed something back. Arden's jaw tightened. He reached out and caught her hands mid-movement, stopping her. "Don't apologize. Fix it." He let go and walked toward the door. Maribel moved fast, her heart slamming against her ribs. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the linens, praying he wouldn't see her. His footsteps passed within inches. She held her breath until he disappeared down the hallway. When she finally exhaled, her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the sheets. Inside the room, Seraphina stood exactly where Arden had left her, one hand still pressed to her reddening cheek. Maribel knocked softly on the doorframe. Seraphina turned, her expression smoothing into something neutral so quickly it felt rehearsed. She nodded, gesturing for Maribel to enter. Maribel stepped inside, her pulse still racing. She set the linens on the bed and moved toward the closet, trying to keep her movements normal. Trying not to stare at the mark blooming across Seraphina's face. But Seraphina caught her looking. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Seraphina crossed the room and picked up a pen and notepad from the nightstand. She wrote something quickly and held it up. "He doesn't mean it. He's under stress." Maribel's stomach turned. She'd heard those words before. From other women. In other houses. Always in the same handwriting, shaky, defensive, desperate to believe the lie. She wanted to say something. Wanted to scream that stress didn't justify it. That love didn't leave bruises. But she couldn't. Because Seraphina wasn't supposed to hear her. So instead, Maribel nodded slowly and turned back to her work, folding towels with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The rules of the Hale estate were simple. Arden controlled everything. Meals were served at exact times. Staff moved through the house on schedules printed and posted in the service areas. Conversations happened in whispers. Mistakes were not tolerated. Seraphina's routine was the most controlled of all. She woke at 7. Breakfast in her room. Morning walk through the garden with Arden when he was home, alone when he wasn't. Afternoons spent reading or painting in the sunroom. Evenings reserved for whatever social obligation Arden had scheduled. She never left the estate without him. Never spoke to staff beyond brief gestures. Never smiled unless someone was watching. Maribel had been assigned to her directly, helping with wardrobe changes, bringing meals, tidying the bedroom. The other staff avoided Seraphina entirely, as if deafness might be contagious. Or as if getting too close to Arden Hale's fiancé was dangerous. Maybe both. Maribel quickly learned that Seraphina's silence wasn't the empty kind. It was full of things unsaid. Her eyes tracked conversations happening across rooms. Her breathing changed when voices rose. She flinched at slammed doors and turned toward footsteps long before they should have been noticeable. One afternoon, Maribel was cleaning the sunroom while Seraphina sat by the window, sketching something in charcoal. The room faced the ocean, all glass and light, but the air inside felt heavy. Maribel was wiping down the coffee table when she accidentally knocked a book onto the floor. The sound was sharp, sudden. Seraphina's hand jerked across the page, smearing charcoal in a thick black line. She looked up, her eyes wide, her breath catching. Then she saw Maribel watching and forced her expression smooth again. She returned to her sketch as if nothing had happened. But Maribel had seen it. The reaction came before the visual cue. Before Seraphina could have known the book had fallen by sight alone. She'd heard it. That night, Maribel lay in her small room and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Seraphina wasn't deaf. She couldn't be. But if she wasn't, then why the lie? Why the elaborate performance? Why let the entire world believe something that wasn't true? And more importantly, why was Arden so determined to keep it that way? Maribel thought about the scar behind Seraphina's ear. About the way Arden's voice turned cold when he reminded staff that his fiancé cannot hear you. About the slap that came without sound because Seraphina had learned not to cry out. Control didn't need chains when it lived inside someone's mind. The next morning, Maribel was adjusting Seraphina's jewelry before a luncheon when she noticed something else. Seraphina wore the same earrings every day. Small. Diamond studs. Expensive but understated. Maribel had seen dozens of jewelry boxes in the closet, each one filled with pieces worth more than cars. But Seraphina never changed the earrings. Almost like she wasn't allowed to. Maribel reached up carefully, her fingers brushing Seraphina's earlobe as she pretended to check the clasp. That's when she felt it. The earring wasn't just decorative. There was something behind it. Something small and hard, tucked into the curve of Seraphina's ear. A device. Maribel's breath caught. Her hands stilled. Seraphina turned her head slightly, meeting Maribel's eyes in the mirror. For 3 seconds the world stopped. Then Arden's voice cut through the room like a blade. Is there a problem? Maribel's heart slammed into her throat. She stepped back quickly, lowering her eyes. No, sir. Just finishing up. Arden stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He looked at Seraphina, then at Maribel, his gaze sharp enough to cut. Good. We're leaving in 5 minutes. He left without another word. Maribel's hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the vanity to steady herself. Seraphina stood slowly, smoothing her dress. She didn't look at Maribel again. But as she walked past, she brushed Maribel's hand with her fingertips. Just once, so briefly it could have been an accident. It wasn't. That night, Maribel couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the device hidden behind the earring. About the way Arden had appeared in the doorway at exactly the wrong moment, like he'd been listening. Like he always knew. She thought about the rules she'd been given. Do not interfere. But what if silence wasn't protection? What if it was a weapon? Maribel rolled onto her side and stared at the wall, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers for. Outside, the ocean crashed against the rocks below the estate, constant and relentless. And somewhere in the mansion, Seraphina Locke lay awake in a bed she couldn't leave, wearing earrings she couldn't remove, living a lie she hadn't chosen. No one ever asked who decided she was deaf. But Maribel Cruz was starting to realize, someone had. If this is giving you chills, hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The coffee cup hit the floor at exactly 6:47 in the morning. Maribel was halfway down the corridor when she heard it, porcelain shattering against tile, liquid splashing across marble. She quickened her pace, her heart already racing before she understood why. Inside the breakfast room, Seraphina stood beside the table, her hand still extended where the cup had slipped. Coffee spread across white stone in dark rivers. Her chest rose and fell too quickly, her eyes locked on the mess like she was watching something far worse than spilled breakfast. The other maid, Rochelle, rushed in with towels, her movements efficient and silent. She'd worked at the estate for 3 years. Long enough to know that accidents near Seraphina meant trouble. Maribel knelt beside the broken pieces, gathering shards into her palm. Seraphina hadn't moved. Her bare feet were inches from the spreading liquid, but she just stood there, frozen. Miss Locke, Rochelle said carefully, keeping her voice low even though Seraphina supposedly couldn't hear it. Please step back. Seraphina didn't respond. Her gaze stayed fixed on the floor. Maribel looked up and saw what Rochelle couldn't, the way Seraphina's pupils were dilated, the way her breathing had turned shallow and fast. This wasn't about a broken cup. This was panic wearing someone else's face. Maribel stood slowly and touched Seraphina's elbow, gentle but firm. Seraphina's head snapped toward her, eyes wide and glassy. For half a second, Maribel saw straight through the performance to the woman trapped underneath. Then Seraphina blinked and the mask slid back into place. She nodded, stepped around the mess and left the room without looking back. Rochelle exhaled hard once she was gone. Girl spooks like a deer, she muttered, soaking up coffee with quick, practiced motions. Been like that since before I started. Arden says she has anxiety on top of everything else. Maribel said nothing. She deposited the broken porcelain into the trash and washed her hands, her mind already spinning. Anxiety. That's what Arden called it. But Maribel had worked with anxious people before. This wasn't that. This was someone living on a knife's edge, waiting for the next cut. Later that morning, Maribel was assigned to help Seraphina dress for a charity board meeting. The closet was larger than Maribel's entire apartment back in Inglewood, rows of designer clothes organized by color and season, shoes displayed like museum pieces. Seraphina stood in front of the mirror in a slip, waiting. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw tight. Maribel pulled a navy dress from the rack and brought it over. As she helped Seraphina step into it, she noticed bruises on her upper arms. Small, finger-shaped, recent. Seraphina caught her staring and pulled the fabric up quickly, covering them. Their eyes met in the mirror. Maribel wanted to say something. Wanted to ask if she was safe. Wanted to offer help, even though she had no idea what help would look like in a house like this. But before she could figure out how to communicate without speaking, Seraphina reached for the notepad on the vanity. She wrote quickly and turned it toward Maribel. You're different from the others. Maribel's throat tightened. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded. Seraphina wrote again, her hand moving faster this time. They don't look at me. You do. Maribel's chest ached. She picked up the pen and wrote back carefully. I see you. Seraphina read the words and something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. Not quite relief. Something closer to recognition, like she'd been invisible for so long that being seen felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. She erased both messages with her palm before Maribel could stop her. Then she turned back to the mirror and let Maribel finish fastening the dress. That afternoon, Maribel was collecting laundry from the master suite when she noticed Seraphina's jewelry box sitting open on the dresser. She shouldn't have looked. Shouldn't have touched anything that wasn't directly part of her job. But the box was right there, velvet-lined and filled with pieces worth more than Maribel would earn in 10 years. She moved closer, her pulse quickening. The diamond stud Seraphina wore every day sat in the top compartment. Maribel lifted one carefully, turning it over in her palm. The earring was heavier than it should have been. Too substantial for just metal and stone. She looked closer. There, tucked into the backing, almost invisible unless you knew to look, was a tiny microphone. No bigger than a pinhead. Professional grade. The kind used for surveillance. Maribel's hands went cold. She set the earring back exactly where she'd found it and stepped away from the dresser, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Arden wasn't just controlling Seraphina. He was listening to her. Every conversation. Every sound. Every moment she thought she was alone. Maribel pressed her back against the wall and tried to breathe. Her mind raced through every interaction she'd had with Seraphina, every whispered word, every quiet moment they'd shared when they thought no one was watching. He'd heard all of it. The door opened. Maribel spun around, her breath catching. Arden stood in the doorway, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. He looked at her, then at the jewelry box, then back at her. Find something interesting? His voice was soft, almost kind. But the threat underneath it was clear as glass. Maribel forced herself to meet his gaze. Just collecting laundry, sir? He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch felt too loud. You've been spending a lot of time with Seraphina? It wasn't a question. That's my job, sir. Arden walked to the dresser and closed the jewelry box with a soft snap. He didn't look at Maribel, but she felt his attention on her like a hand around her throat. Seraphina is fragile, he said quietly. Easily confused. Sometimes she imagines things that aren't real. Anxiety, trauma, the isolation of her condition. It all adds up. He turned to face her then, his expression unreadable. I hope you're not encouraging any of that confusion. Maribel's mouth went dry. She shook her head. No, sir. Good. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because if you did, I'd have to let you go. And I'd make sure no one else in this city hired you again. References matter, Maribel. One bad word from me and doors close. Permanently. The air in the room felt thin. I understand, sir. I'm sure you do. He walked past her toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Maribel? Stay out of things that aren't your concern. Curiosity isn't a virtue here. He left. Maribel stood alone in the room, her legs shaking so badly she had to sit down on the edge of the bed. She thought about the microphone hidden in Seraphina's earrings. About the bruises on her arms. About the way Arden had just threatened her livelihood without raising his voice. This wasn't just control. This was a system. And Maribel had just stepped directly into its gears. What would you risk to help someone who can't ask for help? Do let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Seraphina's breath changed before the door even opened. Maribel noticed it first, the way her shoulders drew up toward her ears, the way her fingers tightened around the book she was holding. They were in the sunroom, late afternoon light pouring through the windows, everything calm and quiet. Then the hallway floor creaked. Seraphina's eyes snapped toward the sound. Her whole body went rigid, like prey hearing a predator move through tall grass. Maribel looked up from folding blankets and watched the door. 3 seconds passed. Then 5. Arden walked in. He was on his phone, his voice low and clipped as he finished a business call. He didn't acknowledge either of them at first, just paced near the window, his free hand shoved into his pocket. Seraphina set her book down carefully and folded her hands in her lap. Her face smoothed into something neutral. Pleasant. Empty. Maribel had seen that transformation a dozen times now, but it still made her stomach turn. Arden ended the call and turned toward Seraphina, his expression softening into something that might have looked like affection to anyone who didn't know better. He signed something to her. Seraphina nodded and signed back. Then Arden's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Not violently. Not in a way that would leave marks. Just firm enough to stop her mid-gesture, his thumb pressing into the tender underside of her arm. Seraphina's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. Arden leaned closer, still smiling, and signed something else with his free hand. Slow. Deliberate. His grip on her wrist never loosened. Seraphina nodded again. Her eyes were glassy. Arden released her and straightened, glancing at Maribel like he just remembered she was there. We're going out tonight, he said. Make sure she's ready by 7. The blue dress. Hair up. Yes, sir. He left without another word. The moment the door closed, Seraphina's hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, her chest rising and falling too fast. Maribel crossed the room and knelt in front of her, moving into her line of sight. Seraphina looked at her, and for just a second, the mask cracked wide open. Tara looked back. Maribel reached out slowly and placed her hand over Seraphina's. She didn't say anything, couldn't because Seraphina wasn't supposed to hear her. But she squeezed gently just once and hoped it was enough. Seraphina closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. Then she wiped it away, took a breath, and put the mask back on. That night, while helping Seraphina into the blue dress Arden had chosen, Maribel noticed something new. A red mark on Seraphina's collarbone, just above the neckline. Fresh. Angry. Shaped like teeth. Maribel's hand stilled on the zipper. Seraphina didn't acknowledge it. Just stood there, staring at herself in the mirror like she was looking at a stranger. Maribel finished fastening the dress and stepped back. She wanted to scream. Wanted to grab Seraphina and run. Wanted to call the police and drag Arden out of this house in handcuffs. But she couldn't. Because women like her didn't win fights against men like him. She knew that. Had learned it 100 times in 100 different houses. Power didn't lose just because it should. Later, after Arden and Seraphina left for their dinner, Maribel found herself alone in the staff quarters with Rochelle. The older woman was sorting linens, her movements automatic, her face tired. You've been here 3 years, Maribel said quietly. Rochelle glanced up. Closer to 4. Why? Have you ever seen Seraphina without Arden? Rochelle's hand stilled. Her expression shifted, cautious, guarded. No. Why would I? She's his fiancée. Does that seem normal to you? Rochelle set down the towel she was folding and looked at Maribel hard. Listen to me carefully. Whatever you think you're seeing, you're not. Whatever you think you know, you don't. This job pays better than anything either of us will find anywhere else in this city. You want to keep it? Stop asking questions. But what if? There is no what if. Rochelle's voice dropped to a whisper. Last girl who asked too many questions got fired. Arden called every agency in LA and made sure she couldn't work again. She left the state. That's what happens when you forget your place. Maribel's throat tightened. So we just ignore it? We survive. Rochelle picked up the towel again. That's what people like us do. We survive. She left the room without another word. Maribel sat alone in the silence, her hands clenched into fists. Rochelle was right. About all of it. Maribel needed this job. She sent money home to her mother every month. She had rent due. Bills piling up. No savings. No safety net. One word from Arden and she'd lose everything. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Seraphina's face. The terror. The exhaustion. The way she moved through the world like someone who'd forgotten what freedom felt like. How many women had looked the other way? How many people had chosen survival over intervention? How many times had silence been mistaken for peace? Maribel stood and walked to the small window overlooking the east lawn. Outside, the garden lights cast long shadows across perfectly trimmed hedges. Everything here looked beautiful. Everything here was a lie. She thought about the microphone in Seraphina's earrings. About Arden's threats. About the way Seraphina had squeezed her hand back in the sunroom, desperate and grateful and drowning. Maribel pressed her forehead against the cold glass and made a decision she couldn't take back. She wasn't going to look away. Not this time. The jewelry box was exactly where Maribel remembered it. She stood in the doorway of the master suite, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. The house was empty, Arden at a board meeting downtown, Seraphina at a doctor's appointment with the driver. She had maybe 20 minutes before someone came back. Maybe less. She shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be doing this. But she couldn't stop thinking about the microphone. About what else Arden might be hiding. About the lie that had turned Seraphina's entire life into a performance. Maribel crossed to the dresser, her hands shaking. She opened the jewelry box carefully, her breath shallow. The diamond earrings sat in the top compartment, innocent and glittering. She picked one up and examined it closely. The microphone was still there, barely visible, embedded in the backing. She set it down and opened the lower compartments, searching for anything else. More jewelry. Watches. Cufflinks. Then, at the very bottom, wrapped in black velvet, something that didn't belong. A small device. Medical-grade plastic. Curved to fit behind an ear. A hearing aid. Outdated by at least a decade, but unmistakable. Maribel's breath stopped. Her hands went numb. She lifted it out of the velvet, turning it over in her palm. It was real. Functional. The kind of device someone would only have if they'd actually needed it. If they'd actually been able to hear. The bedroom door opened. Maribel spun around, the hearing aid clutched in her fist. Arden stood in the doorway. His expression didn't change. Didn't need to. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Put that back. His voice was soft. Come. Deadly. Maribel's throat closed. She couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Arden stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. I said put it back. Maribel's hands trembled so badly she almost dropped the device. She set it back in the jewelry box, her pulse roaring in her ears. Arden crossed the room slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. He stopped inches away, close enough that she could smell his cologne. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Maribel forced herself to meet his eyes. She's not deaf. Careful. She can hear. She's always been able to hear. Arden's jaw tightened. For half a second, something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or fear, but it vanished before Maribel could name it. You don't know what you're talking about. Then why do you have that? She gestured toward the hearing aid. Why does she wear earrings with microphones in them? Why does she react to sounds before anyone signs to her? Arden's hand shot out and gripped her arm hard enough to bruise. Because she's sick, he hissed. Because she's confused and fragile and she needs help. And you, he yanked her closer, are making it worse. Maribel tried to pull away, but his grip was iron. Let me go. Do you know what happens to people who interfere in things they don't understand? His voice dropped to a whisper. They disappear. Not literally. Nothing that dramatic. They just stop mattering. No job. No references. No one willing to vouch for them. They end up cleaning motel rooms for minimum wage, wondering how their life fell apart so fast. He released her suddenly, and Maribel stumbled back against the dresser. Arden smoothed his suit jacket, his expression calm again. Professional. You're a good worker, Maribel. I'd hate to lose you. But if you keep asking questions, if you keep snooping through things that aren't yours, I'll make sure you never work in this city again." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And if you say anything to Seraphina, anything at all, I'll know." He tapped his ear, smiling. "I always know." He left. Maribel stood frozen in the middle of the room, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the dresser to stay upright. She looked down at the jewelry box, at the hearing aid still visible in its velvet wrapping. Arden hadn't made her put it away properly. He'd left it out. Like a warning. Maribel closed the box with trembling hands and left the room, her mind racing. She thought about what Rochelle had said. About survival. About knowing when to walk away. She thought about her mother, who needed her help. About her rent. About the precarious balance of her entire life. And she thought about Seraphina, trapped in a lie so complete that even her own body had been turned into evidence against her. That night, Maribel lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. She could quit. Could pack her things and leave before morning. Could find another job in another part of the city and pretend she'd never seen anything. She could survive. But survival had a cost too. And some costs were paid in silence that lasted forever. Outside her window, the ocean crashed against the rocks below the estate, relentless and endless. Maribel closed her eyes and made a choice. If you are still watching, comment how you feel about all that has happened and remember to subscribe so you won't miss stories like this. The doctor's signature was forged. Maribel found the files 3 days after Arden caught her with the hearing aid. She wasn't supposed to be in his office, wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the West Wing after dark, but desperation had a way of making people reckless. The office door had been left unlocked. Careless. Or maybe Arden was so confident in his control that he didn't think anyone would dare enter. Maribel slipped inside and closed the door silently behind her. The room smelled like leather and expensive whiskey. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, a massive mahogany desk dominated the center, and behind it, a filing cabinet sat partially open. Her hands were sweating as she crossed to it. The first drawer held business documents, contracts, property deeds, investment portfolios. The second drawer was locked. The third opened easily, revealing rows of medical files, each one labeled and organized with obsessive precision. She found Seraphina's name halfway through. The folder was thick, filled with documents spanning nearly 6 years. Maribel pulled it out carefully and opened it on the desk, her heart hammering. The first page was a diagnostic report from a Dr. Marcus Whitfield, dated 5 years ago. It declared Seraphina Locke profoundly deaf due to congenital nerve damage. Irreversible. Permanent. The report recommended sign language acquisition and psychological counseling to address the emotional impact of her condition. Maribel flipped to the next page. Another report. Same diagnosis. Same doctor. Then another. And another. Every 3 months for 5 years, Dr. Whitfield had filed reports confirming Seraphina's deafness, each one stamped and signed with professional authority. But something was wrong. The signatures didn't match. Not perfectly. The curves were slightly different, the pressure inconsistent. Maribel had worked in enough medical offices to recognize the difference between a real signature and one that had been copied too many times. She kept reading. Buried near the back of the folder, she found something else. A patient intake form from 7 years ago before any of the other documents. This one was from a different doctor, a different clinic entirely. Dr. Amarachin. Pacific Sound Medical Center. The form listed Seraphina's reason for visit. Temporary hearing loss following acoustic trauma. Prognosis. Full recovery expected within 6 months with proper treatment. Maribel's breath caught. Temporary hearing loss. Full recovery expected. She flipped through more pages, searching for follow-up reports from Dr. Chin. There weren't any. The medical records just stopped after that first visit, and then 6 months later, Dr. Whitfield's reports began. Reports that said Seraphina had been born deaf. Reports that contradicted everything that came before. Maribel's stomach turned. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures. Every page, every signature, every lie documented in black and white. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Arden had taken a temporary injury and turned it into a permanent condition. He'd found a doctor willing to falsify records, willing to build a narrative that gave him complete control over Seraphina's life. And everyone had believed it. Maribel was replacing the folder when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Her entire body went cold. She shoved the drawer closed and looked around frantically for somewhere to hide. The desk was too exposed. The bookshelves offered no cover. The window. The door opened. Arden stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes locked on Maribel immediately. For 3 seconds neither of them moved. Then Arden stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He set his glass down on the desk with deliberate care. "I knew you'd come looking eventually." His voice was calm, almost impressed. Maribel's throat was too tight to speak. Arden walked to the filing cabinet and opened the drawer she'd just closed. He pulled out Seraphina's folder and held it up. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "You lied." The words came out hoarse. "She was never deaf. You made it up." Arden smiled. Not cruel. Not angry. Just tired. "I didn't make anything up. I protected her." "From what?" "From herself." He dropped the folder on the desk. 6 years ago, Seraphina found out about some financial decisions I'd made. Decisions that kept my family's foundation running, kept thousands of people employed, kept entire communities funded. She didn't understand the complexity. She threatened to go public. Threatened to destroy everything over a technicality. "So you made her deaf." "I made her safe." His voice hardened. "She had a minor injury. Temporary hearing loss from a concert. I saw an opportunity to give her time to calm down, to see reason. Dr. Whitfield understood the situation. He helped me create a narrative that protected her and the foundation. You imprisoned her. I saved her from making a catastrophic mistake." Arden moved closer. "Do you know what would have happened if she'd gone public? The foundation would have collapsed. Thousands of people would have lost jobs. Charities would have shut down. Lives would have been destroyed, all because she couldn't see the bigger picture. So you took away her voice. I gave her purpose." His eyes were cold now. "She's beloved. Admired. People look at her and see courage. The foundation raises millions because of her story. She matters in ways she never would have otherwise." Maribel's hands shook. "She matters because you turned her into a prisoner." Arden's expression shifted, something darker moving underneath the calm. "You think you're helping her. You're not. You're a maid, Maribel. You clean toilets and fold sheets. You have no power here. No influence. No ability to change anything." He picked up his phone and tapped the screen. "One call and you're done. Not just fired. Destroyed. I know people at every agency in this city. Every hospital. Every major employer. You'll be lucky to get work cleaning office buildings at midnight." Maribel's chest ached. She thought about her mother. About her rent. About the fragile life she'd built that Arden could tear apart with a single conversation. But she also thought about Seraphina. About the way terror lived in her eyes. About the marks on her skin and the silence that wasn't a condition but a cage. "Do it," Maribel said quietly. Arden blinked. "What?" "Make your call. Ruin me. But I'm not going to pretend I didn't see this." His jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. But at least it's mine to make." For a long moment they just stared at each other. Then Arden set his phone down. "You have until morning to pack your things and leave. If you're still here when I wake up, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. And if you ever contact Seraphina, if you ever try to tell anyone what you think you know, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Maribel stood alone in the office, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the desk. She'd lost. She knew that. Arden had all the power, all the control, all the resources. But she had the pictures on her phone. And she had something Arden didn't think mattered. She had the truth. Comment how you feel about this. Don't forget to like and share if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat. The suitcase sat open on Maribel's bed at 4:23 in the morning. She hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Seraphina's face. The exhaustion, the fear, the way she moved through the mansion like a ghost haunting her own life. Maribel folded a shirt and placed it in the suitcase. Then another. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced through options that all ended the same way. She could leave. Get out before Arden made good on his threats. Find another job in another city where his influence didn't reach. Survive. But survival meant abandoning Seraphina to a lie that would never end. And Maribel had spent too many years watching powerful men win simply because everyone else was too afraid to fight back. A soft knock broke through her thoughts. She turned. Rochelle stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Heard you're leaving. Word travels fast. In this house." Rochelle stepped inside and closed the door. "Everything travels fast. Arden made sure the whole staff knows you're gone by sunrise." Maribel zipped the suitcase. "Then I guess there's nothing left to say." "Actually, there is." Rochelle pulled something from her pocket. A folded piece of paper, worn at the edges like it had been carried for a long time. I lied to you the other day. Maribel frowned. About what? About not seeing anything. Rochelle's voice dropped. I've worked here 4 years. I've seen plenty. The bruises. The way she flinches. The way Arden watches her like she's property instead of a person. Then why tell me to stay quiet? Because I have a daughter. Rochelle's eyes glistened. Single mom. No degree. This job pays for her school, her food, everything. I can't afford to lose it. I can't afford to be brave. She held out the paper. But maybe you can. Maribel took it carefully. Inside was a phone number and a name. Keisha Landry, investigative reporter, Los Angeles Tribune. She's been trying to dig into the Hale Foundation for 2 years, Rochelle said quietly. Arden's lawyers keep shutting her down. But if you have evidence, real evidence, she'll listen. Maribel stared at the number. Why are you giving me this? Because I'm tired of being quiet. And because that girl upstairs deserves better than what we've all been giving her. Rochelle's voice cracked. I can't risk my job. But I can make sure someone who can does something with what they know. She turned to leave, then paused. There's a gala tomorrow night. Big one. Donors, press, live broadcast. Arden's announcing the engagement officially. If you're going to do something, that's when everyone's watching. She left before Maribel could respond. Maribel looked down at the paper in her hands, then at the photos on her phone. The forged signatures, the falsified medical records, the evidence that could unravel everything Arden had built. She thought about Keisha Landry. About what would happen if the story went public. About the foundation collapsing, the lawsuits, the investigation. About Arden finally facing consequences. But she also thought about what would happen to Seraphina. About the media storm. The questions. The trauma of having her entire life dissected by strangers. Sometimes justice looked like freedom. Sometimes it looked like a different kind of prison. Maribel sat on the edge of her bed and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, rough with sleep. This better be good. My name is Maribel Cruz. I work at the Hale estate. And I have evidence that Arden Hale has been falsifying medical records to control his fiancée for the past 5 years. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm listening. Maribel talked for 40 minutes. She sent the photos. Explained the microphones, the forged signatures, the way Seraphina reacted to sounds she supposedly couldn't hear. Keisha asked sharp questions, her journalist instincts cutting through emotion to find facts. When Maribel finished, Keisha was quiet for a long moment. This is big. Bigger than I thought. But I need more than photos. I need someone willing to go on record. I need Seraphina. She can't. He controls everything about her life. Then we need to get her alone. Away from him. Somewhere he can't monitor. Keisha paused. You said there's a gala tomorrow night? Yes. Then that's our window. You get her away from Arden for 5 minutes, bathroom, hallway, anywhere private, and I'll have a crew ready. We record her statement and we go live before Arden can stop it. Maribel's stomach twisted. He'll destroy me. Probably. But he'll also go to prison. Keisha's voice softened. I know what I'm asking. But if you don't do this, no one will. And she'll spend the rest of her life in that house. Maribel closed her eyes. She thought about her mother. About her apartment. About the precarious balance of survival. And she thought about Seraphina, trapped in a lie so complete that even her own body had been weaponized against her. Okay, Maribel whispered. I'll do it. She hung up and sat in the dark, her heart pounding. Tomorrow night everything would change. One way or another. Sometimes courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and moving forward anyway. Hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box under crystal chandeliers. Maribel stood against the far wall in her black uniform, invisible among the other staff, watching 300 of Los Angeles' wealthiest people drink champagne and pretend to care about charity. The Hale Foundation Gala was always the event of the season. Politicians, celebrities, donors who could write checks with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. And at the center of it all, Arden and Seraphina stood on a small stage, perfectly positioned under a spotlight. Seraphina wore white. A gown that probably cost more than Maribel's annual salary, tailored to make her look elegant and fragile at the same time. Her hair was pulled back, her makeup flawless, her expression serene. She looked like a bride. She looked like a prisoner. Arden held her hand as he addressed the crowd, his voice smooth and practiced. Cameras from 3 news stations captured every word, broadcasting live to thousands of viewers across the city. 6 years ago, Arden said, his tone warm and humble, I met a woman who taught me what real courage looks like. Seraphina has lived her entire life in silence, navigating a world that wasn't built for her. And yet she's never let that stop her from making a difference. He turned toward her, sighing as he spoke. Tonight, I'm honored to announce that she's agreed to be my wife. And together, we're committing $10 million to expand accessibility programs across California. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Seraphina smiled on cue, her hand still trapped in Arden's grip. Maribel's stomach turned. She scanned the room until she found Keisha Landry near the back entrance, dressed like a guest, a small camera hidden in her clutch. Their eyes met briefly. Keisha nodded once. It was time. Maribel moved through the crowd, weaving between tables toward the stage. Her pulse hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Security guards stood at intervals, but none of them paid attention to the staff. Invisible. Unthreatening. Exactly what she needed to be. She reached the side of the stage just as Arden finished his speech. He led Seraphina down the steps, shaking hands and accepting congratulations. Maribel waited until they were near the hallway leading to the private restrooms. Then she stepped forward. "Miss Locke," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Mr. Hale asked me to escort you to freshen up before photos." It was a lie. A desperate, reckless lie. Arden's eyes snapped toward her, sharp and suspicious. "I didn't." "The photographer's team requested it, sir," Maribel interrupted, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "Something about lighting checks. Just 5 minutes." Arden's jaw tightened. He looked at Seraphina, then back at Maribel. "I'll take her myself." "Sir, they specifically asked for female assistants only. Privacy concerns for the press." It was thin. Barely believable. But the crowd was watching, cameras were rolling, and making a scene would raise questions Arden couldn't afford. He released Seraphina's hand slowly. 5 minutes. Maribel nodded and guided Seraphina toward the hallway, her heart slamming against her ribs. She could feel Arden's eyes burning into her back. The hallway was quieter, the noise from the ballroom fading as they walked. Seraphina moved stiffly beside her, confused but compliant. Maribel led her into a small sitting room off the corridor and closed the door. Keisha was already inside, her camera ready. Seraphina froze when she saw the reporter. "It's okay," Maribel said quickly, stepping in front of her. "You're safe. I promise." Seraphina's eyes were wide, her breathing fast. She looked at the door, then at Keisha, then at Maribel. "Miss Locke," Keisha said gently, moving closer but keeping her distance. "My name is Keisha Landry. I'm a reporter. I know what Arden has been doing to you. And I know you can hear me right now." Seraphina's entire body went rigid. Her hand flew to her ear, to the diamond stud she wore every day, to the microphone hidden inside. "He's listening," she signed frantically, her movements sharp with panic. Maribel reached out and took Seraphina's hands, stopping them mid-gesture. "I know," Maribel said. "But he can't stop this. Not anymore." She pulled the small hearing aid from her pocket, the one she'd taken from Arden's office, and held it out. "This is yours. It always was." Seraphina stared at the device, tears welling in her eyes. "You don't have to be silent anymore," Maribel whispered. "You never did." For 3 seconds Seraphina didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached up and removed the diamond earrings. Both of them. She dropped them on the floor and stepped back, her chest heaving. Maribel handed her the hearing aid. Seraphina's hands shook as she turned it over, examining it like it was something holy. Then she lifted it to her ear and pressed it into place. The room was quiet. Just breathing. Just waiting. Then Seraphina's eyes widened. She could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The muffled music from the ballroom. Keisha's camera whirring softly. She could hear everything. Tears streamed down her face. She covered her mouth with both hands, a sob breaking free. "I can hear," she whispered. Her voice was rough and used but unmistakable. "Oh God, I can hear." Keisha raised her camera. "Miss Locke, are you willing to tell your story?" Seraphina looked at Maribel, her eyes wide and terrified and free all at once. Then she turned to the camera. "My name is Seraphina Locke, and I was never deaf." The door slammed open. Arden's hand hit the door frame so hard the wood cracked. His face was white with rage, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on Seraphina like she was something that had betrayed him at a cellular level. Security guards flanked him, confused and hesitant, unsure whether to intervene or wait for orders. "Turn that off," Arden said, his voice low and dangerous. He wasn't looking at Keisha. He was staring at Seraphina. "Turn it off right now." Keisha kept filming. Mr. Hale, would you like to comment on the allegations? I said turn it off. He lunged forward. 2 security guards grabbed his arms, holding him back. Arden twisted against them, his face contorted with fury. She's sick, he shouted. She's confused. She has a documented mental health condition. This is exploitation. I'm not sick, Seraphina said. Her voice cut through the room like a knife. Clear. Steady. Unmistakable. Everyone froze. Seraphina stepped forward, her hands trembling but her spine straight. The hearing aid was still in her ear, visible now, impossible to deny. I was never deaf, she said again, louder this time. Arden made me pretend. He falsified medical records. He paid doctors to lie. He put microphones in my jewelry so he could control every word I said, every move I made. Arden's expression shifted, panic replacing rage. That's not true. She's delusional. She needs help. I have the medical files, Maribel interrupted, stepping beside Seraphina. Her voice shook, but she held up her phone. Dr. Amara Chin diagnosed temporary hearing loss 6 years ago. Full recovery expected. But 6 months later, a Dr. Marcus Whitfield started filing reports saying she was born deaf. The signatures are forged. I have proof. Keisha's camera captured everything. Arden's face draining of color, Seraphina's tears, Maribel's shaking hands holding evidence that couldn't be ignored. You're fired, Arden hissed at Maribel. You're done. I'll make sure you never. I already called the police, Keisha said calmly. They're on their way. And this footage is streaming live to my network right now. 15,000 people are watching. Arden's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since Maribel had met him, he had nothing to say. The door burst open again. This time it was hotel security, real security, accompanied by 2 uniformed LAPD officers. Arden Hale, one of them said. We need you to come with us. Arden straightened his jacket, his composure snapping back into place like a mask. This is a misunderstanding. My lawyers will have this cleared up within the hour. That's fine, sir. But you still need to come with us. They moved toward him. Arden looked at Seraphina one last time, and the expression on his face was pure venom. You have no idea what you've done, he said quietly. No idea what this will cost you. It's already cost me everything, Seraphina whispered. You made sure of that. The officers led Arden out of the room. He didn't resist, didn't shout, just walked with his head high, like a man who believed he was untouchable even as the walls closed in around him. The moment he was gone, Seraphina's legs gave out. Maribel caught her before she hit the floor, wrapping her arms around her as Seraphina sobbed into her shoulder. Broken. Free. I can hear, Seraphina kept saying between gasps. I can hear, I can hear, I can hear. Maribel held her tighter. I know. You're okay. You're safe now. Keisha lowered her camera, her expression soft. We need to get you both out of here. The media's going to swarm this place in about 3 minutes. She was right. Outside, the ballroom had erupted into chaos. Guests shouted questions. Other reporters scrambled for their cameras. The foundation's board members huddled in panicked clusters, already calling lawyers. Keisha led them through a service exit into the cool night air. A car was waiting, a producer Keisha trusted, ready to take them somewhere safe. As they drove away from the hotel, Maribel looked back at the building. Lights blazed from every window. Camera crews had already arrived, satellites extending into the sky like metal flowers. The story was out. Unstoppable now. Arden Hale's perfect life was burning down in real time. And for the first time in 6 years, Seraphina Locke could hear the world collapsing around the man who'd tried to silence her. The next 72 hours were a blur. Seraphina gave a full statement to police, her voice recorded and documented. Maribel handed over the medical files, the photos, everything she'd found. Dr. Marcus Whitfield was arrested within 24 hours, his medical license suspended pending investigation. Bank records showed payments from Arden's personal accounts to Whitfield's offshore holdings. Over $2 million across 5 years. The Hale Foundation's board called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Arden from all positions. Donors pulled funding. Politicians who'd accepted campaign contributions scrambled to distance themselves. The story went national within 48 hours. International by the end of the week. Seraphina's face was everywhere. Magazines, news sites, talk shows. But this time she controlled the narrative. She spoke in her own voice with her own words and the world listened. Maribel watched it all from a small apartment Keisha had helped her find, paid for by the Tribune in exchange for an exclusive interview. Her phone rang constantly, job offers, media requests, people calling her a hero. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and terrified and grateful to be alive. 1 week after the gala, there was a knock on her door. Maribel opened it to find Seraphina standing in the hallway, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair down, no makeup. She looked younger, lighter, real. "Hi," Seraphina said and smiled. It was the first real smile Maribel had ever seen on her face. "Hi," Maribel said back. They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Then Seraphina pulled her into a hug so tight it hurt. "Thank you," she whispered into Maribel's shoulder. "Thank you for seeing me." Maribel's eyes burned. She hugged her back just as hard. "You were always worth seeing." They pulled apart, both crying, both laughing a little. "What happens now?" Maribel asked. Seraphina wiped her eyes. "I don't know. Therapy probably. A lot of it. And I'm working with a lawyer to recover the money Arden stole from me. Turns out he'd been controlling my inheritance for years." "And after that?" "After that." Seraphina looked out the window at the city stretching below them. "I think I'll figure out who I am when no one's telling me who to be." Maribel smiled. "That sounds good. What about you?" Maribel thought about the job offers. About the requests for interviews. About the nonprofit Keisha had suggested she start. An organization to help domestic abuse survivors navigate legal systems and escape dangerous situations. "I think I'm going to keep helping people who need to be seen," Maribel said quietly. Seraphina squeezed her hand. "Then we'll do it together." 3 months later, Arden Hale was indicted on 12 counts including fraud, falsifying medical records, coercion, and domestic abuse. Dr. Whitfield pleaded guilty to conspiracy and agreed to testify against him. The trial was set for the following spring, and legal experts predicted Arden would spend at least a decade in prison. The Hale Foundation was dissolved. Its assets were redistributed to legitimate charities, overseen by an independent board with no connection to the Hale family. Seraphina started a podcast about surviving control and finding your voice. It became one of the most downloaded shows of the year. Maribel opened Safe Haven Advocacy, a nonprofit that provided legal support, housing assistance, and resources for abuse survivors. Rochelle was her first hire. Together, they helped 37 women escape dangerous situations in the first 6 months alone. And one evening, as Maribel sat in her office reviewing case files, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Arden Hale's lawyer had released a statement claiming his client had been acting on advice from a family member, someone higher up in the Hale organization who'd orchestrated the entire scheme. Maribel's blood ran cold. She opened the article and read further. Investigators were now looking into Arden's mother, Victoria Hale, matriarch of the family and primary shareholder in the foundation. Financial records suggested she'd known about the falsified documents. Security footage from the estate showed her meeting with Dr. Whitfield multiple times. Arden hadn't acted alone. He'd been following orders. And Victoria Hale was still free. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. If you are still watching, comment how you feel about all that has happened and remember to subscribe so you won't miss stories like this. Maribel sat across from Keisha in a coffee shop 6 months after the trial began, staring at a manila folder filled with evidence that should have put Victoria Hale behind bars. Should have, but hadn't. "She's good," Keisha said, stirring her coffee. "Better than Arden. Smarter. She's got lawyers who know how to make evidence disappear and witnesses forget what they saw. So that's it." Maribel's voice was tight. "She just walks away?" "For now." Keisha leaned back. "But people like Victoria always slip up eventually. And when she does, we'll be ready." Maribel looked down at the folder. Photos of Victoria at charity events. Financial records showing suspicious transfers. Testimony from former staff members too afraid to go public. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. "What about Seraphina?" Keisha asked. "How's she doing?" Maribel smiled despite everything. "Good. Really good, actually. She's in therapy 3 times a week. She reconnected with her family. Turns out Arden had been intercepting their calls for years. And she's thinking about going back to school." "For what?" "Law. She wants to help other people get out of situations like hers." Keisha grinned. "That's perfect. Tell her to call me when she's ready. I know some people." They finished their coffee and said goodbye. Maribel walked back to her office through streets that felt different now, brighter somehow, even though the world hadn't really changed. What had changed was her. She'd spent most of her life invisible. moving through other people's houses, cleaning their messes, keeping her head down and her mouth shut. She'd survived by being unnoticed. But survival wasn't the same as living. And somewhere between finding that hearing aid and watching Seraphina speak her truth in front of cameras, Maribel had learned that being seen came with a cost, but being silent cost more. That evening, Maribel sat in her small apartment and opened her laptop. The Safe Haven Advocacy website had a new message in the contact form. A woman named Destiny, 26 years old, trapped in a relationship with a man who monitored her phone, controlled her money, told everyone she was mentally unstable. Maribel read the message twice, her chest aching with recognition. Then she typed a response. "You're not alone. And you don't have to stay silent. We can help." She hit send and closed the laptop. Outside her window, the city stretched into the distance. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of quiet battles being fought in houses that looked peaceful from the outside. Maribel thought about all the women like Seraphina. All the people like Destiny. All the voices that had been stolen by people who believed power meant control. She thought about maids and nurses and cleaners and caregivers, people society taught to be invisible, to serve without complaint, to witness suffering and say nothing. But invisibility was a choice, and so was speaking up. Maribel stood and looked at herself in the mirror. She saw a woman who'd risked everything to do what was right. A woman who'd lost her job and nearly lost her future but had gained something more valuable. She'd gained proof that one person could make a difference. That courage didn't require wealth or status or power. That sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was care when you were supposed to look away. And she'd gained a purpose that felt bigger than survival. Weeks turned into months. Arden's trial concluded with a guilty verdict on all counts. 15 years in federal prison. Dr. Whitfield received 8 years. The media moved on to other scandals, other stories. But Maribel and Seraphina kept working. They expanded Safe Haven to 3 more cities. They lobbied for legislation protecting abuse survivors. They trained volunteers to recognize signs of coercive control. And they never stopped looking for evidence against Victoria Hale. 1 year after the gala, Maribel received a package at her office. No return address. Just a flash drive and a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. "She thinks she's safe. She's not. This is everything you need." Maribel plugged the flash drive into her computer. Her hands shook as files loaded. Emails between Victoria and Dr. Whitfield, financial records showing payments made directly from her accounts, recorded phone conversations where she discussed the plan to keep Seraphina silent. Everything they needed. Maribel called Keisha immediately. Within 48 hours the story broke. Within a week, Victoria Hale was arrested. The trial would take months, maybe years. But justice moved slowly when it moved at all. And sometimes slowly was enough. Maribel stood in her office one evening, looking at photos pinned to a wall, women they'd helped, families they'd reunited, lives they'd rebuilt from nothing. Seraphina's photo was in the center. Smiling. Free. Alive. Maribel thought about the night she'd found the hearing aid. About the choice she'd made to keep it instead of looking away. About how easily she could have chosen survival over risk. But she hadn't. And neither had Seraphina. And because they'd refused to stay silent, other women now had a chance to speak too. That was the lesson. The one that mattered. Power feared truth. Power feared witnesses. Power feared people who refused to be invisible. And sometimes, not always but sometimes, truth won. Not because it was stronger. Not because it had more money or better lawyers or higher status. But because enough people decided it mattered more than fear. Maribel turned off the office lights and locked the door behind her. Tomorrow another message would arrive. Another person needing help. Another story that deserved to be heard. And she would be ready. Because heroes didn't always wear expensive clothes or live in mansions or have their names on buildings. Sometimes they wore uniforms. Sometimes they cleaned houses. Sometimes they were the people everyone else looked through instead of at. And sometimes, those were exactly the people who changed everything. Maribel walked into the night, the city lights reflecting off glass towers above her. Somewhere in those buildings, someone was trapped. Someone was suffering. Someone was waiting for proof that they mattered. And somewhere else, someone was deciding whether to look away or speak up. The choice was always there. Quiet. Waiting. The question was who would be brave enough to make it. Maribel knew her answer. And she'd spend the rest of her life making sure others knew theirs too. Because silence wasn't peace. It never had been. And the most powerful thing anyone could do was refuse to let it win. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that inspires change and gives voice to the voiceless. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Together, we can make sure no one's story stays silent. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's keep shining light where it's needed most.